All right, and I am returned to resume reading. We're on chapter 14 now, just shy of being halfway through the book. So I'm going to keep this intro rather short. The only thing I was really going to point out is the usual, which is, of course, over here we have our trusty corgi friend with a fez on top of his head because fezzes are cool. And yes, sonic screwdriver here. We're going to go ahead and put that right there. Now that we've gotten that out of the way, we can resume the reading. Just adjust my seat accordingly. And we are ready to go. 14. Their dad came. Yeah, their dad came to pick them up the day before Thanksgiving. When he pulled up in front of Pound Hall, Ren and Courtney were already sitting in the back of the Honda. Ren and Kath usually sat in the back seat together. Their dad would complain that he felt like a cab driver, and they'd say, "No, limo driver. Home, James." "Wow, look at this," he said when Kath sat in the front seat next to him. "Company." She tried to smile. Courtney and Wren were talking in the back seat, but with the radio up, Kath couldn't hear them. Once they were on the interstate, she leaned over to her dad. "How's Gravioli?" she asked. "What?" He turned down the radio. "Dad," Wren said, "that's our jam." "Sorry," he said, shifting the volume to the back seat. What's that?" he asked Kath. "Gravioli," she said. "Oh," he made a face. "To hell with gravioli. Did you know that it's actually canned ravioli soaked in slimy brown gravy?" "That sounds disgusting," Kath said. "It's revolting," he said. "It's like dog food for people. Maybe that's what we should have pitched. Do you secretly want to eat dog food? Does the smell of it make your mouth water?" Kath joined in her best announcer's voice. "Is the only thing keeping you from eating dog food the fear that your neighbors will notice all the cans and realize that you don't have a dog?" "Gravioli," her dad said, rounding out every vowel sound. "It's dog food for people." You don't get you didn't get the business," Cass said. No, I'm sorry. He shook his head for a little too long. "We did get it. Sometimes getting it is indefinitely worse than not getting it. It was a shootout. 6 agencies. They picked us, and then they rejected every good idea we had, and then, out of desperation, Kelly says in a client meeting, maybe there's a bear who comes out of hibernation really hungry, and all it can say is grrr, and then the bear gets a big bowl of delicious ravioli, and it turns into a human being. And the client just loved the idea. Just fucking flipped, started shouting, 'That's it!'" Kath glanced back to see if Courtney was listening. Their dad only cursed when he was talking about work, and sometimes when he was manic. He said that ad agencies were worse than submarines, all cussing and claustrophobia. "So now we're doing cartoon bears and ravioli," he said. "That sounds terrible." "It's torture. We're doing 4 TV spots. 4 different bears turned into 4 different people. 4. So we can never cover our races." And then fucking Kelly asks if we should make the Asian guy a panda bear. And he was serious. "Not only is that racist, panda bears don't hibernate." Kath giggled. That's what I have to say to my boss. "It's an interesting idea, Kelly, but panda bears don't hibernate." And you know what she says? Kath laughed. "Uh-huh, tell me. Don't be so literal, Arthur." "No." "Yes," her dad laughed, shaking his head again, too fast, too long. Working this client is making my brain dig its own. It is like making my brain dig its own grave. It's ravioli," Cass said. He laughed again. "It's all right," he said, tapping the steering wheel. "It's money, just money." She knew that wasn't true. It was never about the money with him. It was about the work. It was about coming up with the perfect idea, the most elegant solution. Her dad didn't really care what he was selling, tampons or tractors or dog food for people. He just wanted to find the perfect puzzle piece idea that would be beautiful and right. But when he found that idea, it almost always got killed. Either the client rejected it, or his boss rejected it, or changed it, and then it was like someone tapped straight into her dad's heart, and was draining the sap from his soul. After they dropped Courtney off in West O, Ren slid forward in her seat and turned down the radio. Seatbelt, their dad said. She sat back and buckled up again. Is Grandma coming over tomorrow? No, he said. She went to stay in Chicago with Aunt Lynn for a month. She wants to spend the holidays with the kids. We're kids, Ren said. Not anymore. You're sophisticated young women. Nobody wants to watch you unwrap gift cards. Hey, what time is your mom coming to get you? Kath turned sharply to look at her sister. Ren was already watching Kath. Noon, she said guardedly. They're having lunch at 1. So we'll eat at 6? 7? Will you save some room? She's coming to get you, she's coming to get you? Kath asked. She's coming to our house? Their dad looked strangely at Kath, then into the mirror at Ren. I thought you guys were going to talk about this. Ren rolled her eyes and looked out the window. I knew she'd just freak out. I'm not freaking out, Kath said, feeling her eyes start to sting. And if I am freaking out, it's because you're not telling me things. It's not a big deal, Ren said. I've talked to Mom a few times on the phone, and I'm going to hang out with her for a couple hours tomorrow. You talked to her for the first time in 10 years, and it's not a big deal, and you call her Mom? What am I supposed to call her? You're not. Kath turned almost completely to face the back seat, straining against the seatbelt. You're not supposed to call her. She felt Dad's hand on her knee. Kath. No, Kath said. Not you two. Not after everything. She's your mother, he said. That's a technicality, Kath said. Why is she even bothering us? She wants to get to know us, Ren answered. Well, that's bloody convenient, now that we don't need her anymore. Bloody, Ren said. Watch her there, Kath. You slipping into snow speak. Kath felt tears on her cheeks. Why do you keep doing that? What? Making little comments about Simon and Baz. I wasn't. You were, Kath said. You are. Whatever. She left us. She didn't love us. It isn't that simple, Ren said, watching the buildings go by. It is for me, Kath. Kath turned back around in her seat and folded her arms. Her dad's face was red, and then he was tapping on the steering wheel. When they got home, Kath didn't want to be the one to go upstairs. She knew that if she went upstairs, she'd just feel trapped and miserable, like the crazy one, like the little kid who'd been sent to her room. Instead, she went to the kitchen. She stood next to the counter and looked out into the backyard. Her dad still hadn't taken down their swing set. She wished he would. It was a death trap now. The neighbor kids liked to sneak into the yard and play on it. I thought you guys were talking about all this. He was standing behind her. Kath shrugged. He put his hand on her shoulder, but didn't turn around. Ren's right, he said. It isn't that simple. Stop, Kath said. Just stop, okay? I can't believe you're taking her side. I'm on both your sides. Ren didn't mean Ren's side. Kath whipped around. She felt a new wave of tears. Hers. Her side. She left you. We weren't good together, Kath. Is that why she left us too? Because we weren't good together? She needed some time. She couldn't handle being a parent. And you could? Kath saw the hurt in his eyes and shook her head. I didn't mean it that way, Dad. He took a deep breath. Look, he said, to be honest, I don't love this either. It would be so much easier for me if I never had to think about Laura ever again, but she's your mother. Everybody needs to stop saying that, Kath turned back to the window. You don't get to be the mother if you show up after the kids are already grown up. She's like all those animals who show up at the end of the story to eat the little red hen's bread. Back when we needed her, she wouldn't even return our phone calls. But when we started our periods, we had to Google the details. But now, after we've stopped missing her, after we stopped crying for her, after we've got shit figured out, now she wants to get to know us. I don't need a mother now. Thanks. I'm good. Her dad laughed. She glanced over her shoulder at him. Why are you laughing? I don't know, he said. The bread thing, I think. Also, did you really Google your period? You could have asked me about that. I know about periods. Kath exhaled. It's okay. We Googled everything back then. You don't have to talk to her, he said softly. Nobody's gonna make you. Yeah, but Wren has already. She's already let down the drawbridge. Wren must have some shit she still needs to figure out. Kath clenched her fist and pushed them into her eyes. I just don't like this. I don't like thinking about her. I don't want to see her. I don't want her in this house, thinking about how it used to be her house, about how we used to be hers too. I don't want her brain touching us. Her dad pulled Kath into his arms. I know. I feel like everything's upside down. He took another deep breath. Me too. Did you freak out when she called? I cried for 3 hours. Oh, Dad. Your grandmother gave me your cell phone number. Have you seen her? No. Kath shuddered, and her dad squeezed her tight. When I think about her coming here, he said, it's like that scene in Fellowship of the Ring when the hobbits are hiding from the Nazgul. Your mother isn't evil, Kath. That's just how I feel. He was quiet for a few seconds. Me too. Wren didn't get back in time for Thanksgiving dinner. She ended up staying the night. I feel like if we sat, I feel like if we set the table and pretend everything's normal. I feel like if we set the table and pretend everything's normal, Cass said to her dad, it's just going to be worse. Agreed, he said. They ate in the living room, turkey and mashed potatoes, and watched the History Channel. The green bean casserole sat in the kitchen and got cold because Wren was the only person who ever ate it. Baz, have you ever done this before? Simon. Yes. No. Yes or no? Yes. Not like this. Baz. Not with a boy? Simon. Not when I really wanted it. From Shall We? Posted April 2010 by fanfics.net author Magicath. 15. When Kath saw it was Levi standing outside the door, she was so happy to see his always friendly face. She just let him in. She didn't even bother telling him that Reagan wasn't here. Is Reagan here? He asked as soon as he was in the room. Levi's face wasn't friendly. His forehead was furrowed, and his little bow lips were drawn tight. No, Kath said. She went out hours ago. She didn't add, with a giant guy named Chance who plays a lot of intramural football and looks like he could play John Henry in the movie version of John Henry. Fuck, Levi said, leaning back against the door, even angry. He was leaner. What's wrong? Kath asked. Was he finally jealous? Didn't he know about the other guys? Kath always figured that he and Reagan had an arrangement. She was supposed to study with me, he said. Oh, Kath said, not understanding. Well, you could still study here if you want. No, angry. I need her help. We were supposed to study last night and she put me off. And the test is tomorrow. He hurled a book down Reagan's bed. Then he sat at the end of cast, looking away from her but still hiding his face. She said she'd study with me. Kath walked over and picked up the book. The Outsiders? Yeah, he looked up. Have you read it? No. Have you? No. So read it, she said. Your test is tomorrow. You have time. It doesn't look very long. Levi shook his head and looked at the floor again. You don't understand. I have to pass this test. So read the book. Were you just going to let Reagan read it for you? He shook his head again. Not in answer, more like he was shaking his head at the very idea of reading the book. I told you, I'm not much of a book person. Levi always said that. I'm not a book person. Like books were rich deserts or scary movies. Yeah, but this is school, she said. Would you let Reagan take the test for you? Maybe, he huffed. If that was an option. Kath dropped the book next to him on her bed and went to her desk. You may as well watch the movie, she said distastefully. It's not available. Kath made a noise like, in her throat. You don't understand, Levi said. If I don't get a C in this class, I get kicked out of my program. So read the book. It's not that simple. It's exactly that simple, Kath said. You have a test tomorrow. Your girlfriend isn't here to do the work. Read the book. You don't understand anything. Levi was standing now. He'd walked to the door, but Kath wouldn't turn to face him. She was tired of fighting. The fight wasn't even hers. Okay, she said, I don't understand. Whatever. Reagan isn't here, and I have a ton of reading to do, and nobody to do it for me. So, she heard him open the door. I tried to read it, he said roughly. I've been trying for the last 2 hours. I'm not a reader. I've never finished a book. Kath looked at him, feeling a sudden guilty grab in her stomach. Are you trying to tell me you can't read? Levi pushed his hair back violently. Of course I can read, he said. Jesus Christ. Then what are you trying to tell me? That you don't want to? No. He closed his eyes and took a deep breath through his nose. I don't know why. I don't know why I'm trying to tell you anything. I can read. I just can't read books. So pretend it's a really long street sign and muddle through it. Jesus, he said, surprised, hurt. What have I ever done to make you be this mean to me? I'm not being mean, Cass said, knowing that she probably was. I just don't know what you want me to say. That I approve? That what you and Reagan do isn't any of my business. You think I'm lazy, his eyes were on the ground, and I'm not. Okay. It's like I can't focus, he said, turning away from her in the doorway. Like I read the same paragraph over and over, and I still don't know what it says. Like the words go right through me and I can't hold on to them. Okay, she said. He looked back, just far enough to face her. Levi's eyes were too big in his face when he wasn't smiling. I'm not a cheater, he said. Then he walked away, letting the door close behind him. Kath exhaled, then inhaled. Her chest was so tight it hurt both ways. Levi shouldn't get to make her feel this way. He shouldn't even have access to her chest. Levi wasn't her boyfriend. He wasn't family. She didn't choose him. She was stuck with him because she was stuck with Reagan. He was roommate-in-law. The Outsiders was still sitting on her bed. Kath grabbed it and ran out the door. Levi! She ran down the hall. Levi! He was standing in front of the elevator with his hands shoved into his coat pockets. Kath stopped running when she saw him. He turned to look at her. Yeah. Kath stopped running when she saw him. He turned to look at her. His eyes were still too big. You forgot your book. She held it up. Thanks, he said, holding out his hand. Kath ignored it. Look, why don't you come back? Reagan's probably on her way. I'm sorry I yelled at you, he said. Did you yell at me? I raised my voice. She rolled her eyes and took a step backwards toward her room. Come on. Levi looked in her eyes, and she let him. Are you sure? Come on. Kath turned toward her and waited for him to fall into step beside her. I'm sorry, she said softly. I didn't realize you were having a serious conversation until we were. I'm just really stressed about this test, he said. They stopped at her door. Kath suddenly brought her wrist up to her temples. Crap. She held her hands at the top of her head. Crap, crap, crap. We're locked out. I don't have my keys. I got you. Levi grinned and pulled out his key ring. Her jaw dropped. You have a key to our room? Reagan gave me her spare for emergencies. He unlocked the door and held it open. Then why are you always sitting in the hall? That's never an emergency. Kath walked in and Levi followed him. He was smiling again, but he was still obviously operating at 30 degrees below regular Levi. They might be done fighting, but he was still going to fail his test. So you couldn't find the movie, she asked, even online? No, and the movie's no good anyway. Teachers can always tell when you watch the movie. He flopped down at the head of her bed. Normally I listen to the audiobook. That counts as reading, Kath said, sitting at her desk. It does? Of course. He kicked out one of the legs of her chair playfully and then rested his feet there on the rail. Well, then, never mind. I guess I have read lots of books. This one wasn't available. He unzipped his jacket, and it fell open. He was wearing a green and yellow plaid shirt underneath. So what? Was Reagan going to read it to you? Usually we just go over the highlights. It helps her too, to review it. Kath looked down at the paperback. Well, I've got nothing for you. All I know about the Outsiders is stay gold, pony boy. Levi sighed and pushed back his chair. Kath shuffled the pages with her thumb. It really was a short book, with tons of dialogue. She looked up at Levi. The sun was setting behind her, and he was sitting in a wash of orange light. Kath turned her chair toward the bed, knocking his feet without warning to the ground. Then she rested on her own feet on the bed, or rested her own feet on the bed frame and took off her glasses, tucking them in her hair. When I stepped out into the bright sunlight from the darkness of the movie house, Kath, Levi whispered. Ugh. She felt her chair wobble and knew he was kicking it. You don't have to do that. Obviously, she said. When I stepped out into the bright sunlight, Cather. She cleared her throat, still focused on the book. Shut up. I owe you one. At least one. And also, I'm trying to read here. When I stepped into the bright sunlight from the darkness of the movie house, I just saw two things on my mind. When Kath glanced up between paragraphs, Levi was grinning. He bent forward to slide out his coat, then found a new way to rest his legs on her chair and leaned back against the wall, closing his eyes. Kath had never read out loud this much before. Fortunately, it was a good book, so sort of forgot after a while that she was reading out loud and Levi was listening. And the circumstances that got them there, an hour or so had passed, maybe even two, before Kath dropped her hands and the book into her lap. The sun had finished setting, and the only light in her room was from her desk lamp. You can stop whenever you want, Levi said. I don't want to stop. She looked at him. I'm just really. She was blushing. She wasn't sure why. Thirsty. Levi laughed and sat up. Oh, yeah? Let me get you something. You want soda? Water? I could be back here in 10 with a gingerbread latte. She was about to tell him to not bother, but then she remembered how good that gingerbread latte was. Really? Back in 10, he said, already standing, putting on his jacket. He stopped in the doorway. Kath felt tense, remembering how she'd looked the last time he stood there. Levi smiled. Kath didn't know what to do, so she sort of nodded and gave him the world's lamest thumbs up. When he was gone, she stood up and stretched. Her back and her shoulders popped. She went to the bathroom, came back, stretched again, checked her phone, then lay down on her bed. It smelled like Levi, like coffee grounds, and some sort of warm, spicy thing that might be cologne, or soap, or deodorant. Levi sat on her bed so often it was all familiar. Sometimes he smelled like cigarette smoke, but not tonight. Sometimes like beer. She left the door unlocked, so when he knocked again, Kath just sat up and told him to come in. She meant to get up and sit back down at her desk, but Levi was already handing her drinks and taking off his coat. His face was flushed from the cold, and when his coat touched her, it was so cold she jumped. Five below, he said, taking off his hat, rifling his hair until it stuck up again. Scoot over. Kath did, scooting up toward her pillow and leaning against the wall. Levi took his drink and smiled at her. She set the drink carrier on her desk, and he brought her a big glass of water, too. Can I ask you something? She looked down at her Starbucks cup. Of course. Why did you take a literature class if you can't finish a book? He turned to her, the way they were sitting, shoulder to shoulder. I need 6 hours of literature to graduate. That's two classes. I tried to get one out of the way freshman year, but I failed it. I failed a lot that year. How do you get through any of your classes? Kath had hours of assignment reading almost every single night. Coping strategies, such as? I record my lectures and listen to them later. Professors usually cover most of what's on the test in class, and I find study groups. And you lean on Reagan. Not just Reagan, he grinned. I'm really good at quickly identifying the smartest girl in every class. Kath frowned at him. God, Levi, that's so exploitative. How is that exploitative? I don't make them wear miniskirts. I don't call them baby. I just say, hello, smart girl, would you like to talk to me about Great Expectations? They probably think you like them. I do like them. If it weren't so exploitative, you'd harass smart boys too. I do, in a pinch. Do you feel exploited, Cather? He was still grinning over at her over his coffee cup. No, she said. I know that you don't like me. You don't know anything. So, this is old hat for you, finding a girl to read a whole book to you? He shook his head. No, this is a first. Well, now I feel exploited, she said, setting her drink down and reaching for the book. Thank you, he said, Chapter 7. I'm serious. Levi pulled the book down and looked at her. Thank you. Kath held his eyes for a few seconds. Then she nodded and pulled. Then she nodded and pulled back the book. After another 20 pages, Kath was getting sleepy. At some point, Levi had leaned against her, and then she leaned back, and it was hard to think about what was happening on the side of her body because she was busy reading. Though there was almost an entire chapter where her lips and her eyes were moving, but her brain wasn't keeping track of anything but how warm he was, how warm her roommate's boyfriend was, one of her roommate's boyfriends. Did that matter? If Reagan had 3 boyfriends, did that mean that this was only 1/3 wrong? Just leaning against Levi probably wasn't wrong, but leaning against him because he was warm and not exactly soft, wrong. Kath's voice rasped, and he sat up away from her a little bit. Want to take a break? He asked. She nodded, only partly grateful. Levi stood up and stretched. The tails of his flannel shirt didn't quite lift up over the waist of his jeans. Kath stood up too and rubbed her eyes. You're tired, he said. Let's stop. We're not stopping now, she said. We're almost done. We've still got another 50 pages. Are you getting bored? No, I just feel like it's too much, what you're doing for me. Bordering on exploitative. Kath said. I'll be right back. And then we'll finish. We're halfway done, and I want you to know what happens. No, and I want to know what happens. Nobody's said, stay gold, Ponyboy, yet. When she came back, Levi was in the hallway, leaning against the door. He must have gone up to the boys' floor to use the bathroom. This is weird now. This is weird now that I know you have a key, she said. She let him in, and he dropped down onto the bed again and smiled at her. Kath glanced at her desk chair, then felt his hand on her sleeve. He pulled her down next to him on the bed, and their eyes met for a second. Kath looked away as if they hadn't. Look, what we sell at Starbucks, he said, holding an energy bar. Look what we sell at Starbucks, he said, holding an energy bar out to her. Kath took it. Blueberry Bliss. Wow, this takes me back 2 whole months. Months are different in college, Levi said, especially freshman year. Too much happens. Every freshman month equals 6 regular months. They're like dog months. She unwrapped the protein bar and offered him half. He took it and tapped it against hers. Cheers. It was really late, and too dark in the room to be reading this much. Kath's voice was rough now, like someone had run a dull knife across it. She was recovering from a cold or a crying jag. At some point, Levi had put his left arm around her and pulled her back against his chest. She'd been fidgeting and rubbing her back on the wall, and Levi just reached behind her and pulled her into him. Then his hands had fallen back down to the bed and stayed there. Except for when he was stretched or moved. When he moved, Levi would bring his hand up to Kath's shoulder and hold her against him while he adjusted. She could feel his chest rising when he breathed. She could feel his breath on her hair sometimes. When he moved his chin, it bumped into the back of her head. The muscles in Kath's arms and her back and her neck were starting to ache, just from being held so long at attention. She lost her place in the book and stopped reading for a moment. Levi's chin bumped into her head. Take a break, he said, in a voice that wasn't a whisper, but it was just as soft. She nodded, and he held her left elbow while he reached his right arm across her to get the glass of water. His body curved around for a second, then settled back against the wall. He kept his hand on her elbow. Kath took a drink, then set down the water. She tried not to squirm, but her back was stiff, and she arched it against him. You okay? He asked. She nodded again, and then she felt him slowly moving. Here. Levi slid down the wall onto the bed, resting on his side, then tugged Kath down so she was lying on her back in front of him, his arm beneath her head like a pillow. She relaxed her shoulders and felt warm flannel against the back of her neck. Better? He asked in his superscript voice. He was looking at her face, giving Kath a chance to say no without having to say it out loud. She didn't speak, or nod, or answer, instead looked down and shifted slightly toward him onto her side, leaning the book against his chest. She started reading again and felt Levi's elbow curve around her shoulder. Kath didn't have to read very loud when he was this close, which was good because her voice was almost gone. Gone. God. Levi was warm and up close. He smelled so much like himself it made her tear up. Her eyes were tired. She was tired. When Johnny, one of the main characters, got hurt, Levi took a sharp breath. By that time, Kath's cheek was on his chest, and she could feel his ribs expanding. She took a deep breath, too. Her voice broke a little more, and Levi tightened his grip around her. She wondered whether there was any blood left in his arm. She wondered what happened when they got to the end of the story. She kept reading. There were too many boys in this book, too many arms and legs and flushed faces. She'd expected to laugh when she finally got to the line, "Stay gold, pony boy," but she didn't, because it meant that Johnny was dead, and she thought that maybe Levi was crying. Maybe Kath was crying too. Her eyes were tired. She was tired. When I stepped out into the bright sunlight from the darkness of the movie house, I had only two things on my mind: Paul Newman and a ride home. Kath closed the book and let it fall on Levi's chest. Not sure what happened next. Not sure she was awake, all things considered. The moment it fell, he pulled her onto him with both arms, her chest pressed against his, and the paperback slid between their stomachs. Kath's eyes were half closed, so were Levi's, and his lips only looked small from afar. She realized, because their doll-like pucker, they were perfectly big. Really, now that she had a good look at them, perfectly something. He nudged his nose against hers, and their mouths fell sleepily together, already soft and open. When Kath's eyes closed, her eyelids stuck. She wanted to open them. She wanted to get a better look at Levi's too dark eyebrows. She wanted to admire his crazy vampire hairline. She had a feeling this was never going to happen again, and that it might ruin what was left of her life. She wanted to open her eyes and bear witness, but she was tired. And his mouth was so soft, and nobody had ever kissed Kath like this before. Only Abel had kissed her before, and that was like getting pushed squarely on the mouth and pushing back. Levi's kisses were all talking, or were all taking, like he was drawing something out of her with soft little jabs of his chin. She brought her fingers up to his hair. She couldn't open her eyes. Eventually, she couldn't stay awake. "I'm sorry, Penelope." "Don't waste my time with sorries, Simon. If we stop to apologize and forgive each other every time we step on each other's toes, we'll never have time to be friends." From Chapter 4, Simon Snow and the Second Serpent. Copyright 2003 by Gemma T. Leslie. 16. Kath didn't wake up when the door swung open, but she jumped when it slammed closed. That's when she felt Levi sprawled out beneath her, the warm scrape of his chin against her forehead. Then she woke up. Reagan was standing at the end of Kath's bed, staring at them. She was still wearing last night's jeans, and her silvery blue eyes shadow had drifted onto her cheeks. Kath sat up, and Levi sat up, groggily, and Kath felt her stomach barreling into her throat. Levi reached for Kath's phone and looked at it. "Shit," he said. "I'm 2 hours late for work." He was up then, putting on his coat. Fell asleep reading? Fell asleep reading, he said, half to Reagan, half to the floor. "Reading," Reagan said, looking at Kath. "Later," Levi said, more to the floor than to either of them, and then he was gone, and Reagan was still standing at the end of Kath's bed. Kath's eyes were sticky and sore and suddenly full of tears. "I'm so sorry," she said, feeling it in her stomach and in every sore muscle between her shoulders. "Oh my God." "Don't," Reagan said. She was obviously furious. "I'm just so sorry. Don't. Do not apologize." Kath crossed her legs and hunched over, holding her face. "But I knew he was your boyfriend." Kath was crying now, even though it probably it would probably just make Reagan more angry. He's not my boyfriend, Reagan said, very nearly shouting. Not anymore. Not for a long time, actually. So just don't. Reagan inhaled loudly and then let it out. I just didn't expect this to happen, she said. And if it did happen, I didn't expect it to bother me. I just it's Levi, and Levi always likes me best. He's not her boyfriend. He still likes you best, Cass said, trying not to whimper. Don't be an idiot, Cather. Reagan's voice was serrated. I mean, I know that you are about this, but try not to be an idiot right this moment. I'm sorry, Cass said, trying and failing to look up at her roommate. I still don't know why I did it. I swear I'm not that kind of girl. Reagan finally turned away. She dropped her bag on the bed and grabbed her towel. What kind of girl is that, Kath? The kind girl? I'm gonna take a shower when I come back. I'm gonna take a shower. Uh, when I come back, when I come back, I'll be over this. And then when she came back, she was. Kath had curled up on her bed and let herself cry like she hadn't all Thanksgiving weekend. She found the Outsiders wedged between the bed and the wall and threw it on the floor. Reagan saw the book when she came back to the room. She was wearing yoga pants and tight gray hoodie and square brown glasses instead of contacts. Oh, fuck, she said, picking up the book. I was supposed to help him study. She looked over at Kath. Were you actually just reading? Not just, Kath said, her voice in a hiccupy wheeze. Stop crying, Reagan said. I mean it. Kath closed her eyes and rolled towards the wall. Reagan sat at the end of her bed. He's not my boyfriend, she said solemnly, and I knew he liked you. He was here constantly. I just didn't know that you liked him back. I thought he was here constantly because he was your boyfriend, Kath said. I didn't want to like him back. I tried to be mean to him. I thought you were just being mean. Or I thought you were just mean, Reagan said. I like that about you. Kath laughed and rubbed her eyes for the 100th time in 12 hours. She felt like she had pink eye. I'm over it, Reagan said. I was just surprised. You can't be over it, Cass said, sitting up and leaning against the wall. Even if I didn't kiss your boyfriend, I thought I was kissing your boyfriend. That's how I was going to repay you for all the nice. Uh, that's how I was going to repay you for all the nice things you've done for me. Wow, Reagan said. When you put it that way, it's pretty fucked up. Kath nodded miserably. So why'd you do it? Kath thought of Levi's warmth against her arm last night, and his 10,000 smiles, and his 40-acre forehead. She just closed her eyes, then pressed the heels of her hands into them. I just really, really wanted to. Reagan sighed. Okay, she said. Here's the deal. I'm hungry and I have to finish reading The Outsiders. Levi likes you, you like him, I'm over it. I It could get weird around here real fast if you start dating my high school boyfriend, but there's no turning back, you know? Kath didn't answer. Reagan kept talking. And if he were still my boyfriend, we'd have to throw down, but he's not. So let's go have lunch, okay? Kath looked up at Reagan and nodded her head. Kath had already missed her morning classes, including fiction writing. She thought about Nick, and right at that moment, it was like thinking about almost no anybody. Reagan was eating a bowl of Lucky Charms. Okay, she said, stabbing her spoon at Kath. Now what? Now what? What? Kath said, her mouth full of grilled cheese. Now what with Levi? Kath swallowed. Nothing. I don't know. Do I have to know what? Do you want my help with this? Kath looked at Reagan. Even without her makeup and hair, the girl was terrifying. There was just no fear in her, no hesitation. Talking to Reagan was like standing in front of an oncoming train. I don't know what this is, Kath said. She clenched her fists in her lap and forced herself to keep talking. I feel like what happened last night was just an aberration. Like it could only have happened in the middle of the night when he and I were both really tired. Because if it had been daylight, we would have seen how inappropriate it was. I told you, Reagan said, he's not my boyfriend. It's not just that. Kath turned her face towards the wall windows, then back at Reagan, earnestly. It was one thing when I had a crush on him and he was totally unattainable, but I don't think I could actually be with someone like Levi. It would be like interspecies dating. Reagan let her spoon drop into her cereal. What's wrong with Levi? Nothing, Cass said. He's just not like me. You mean smart? Levi is really smart, Cass said defensively. I know, Reagan said, just as defensively. He's different, Cass said. He's older, he smokes, and he drinks, and he's probably had sex. I mean, he looks like he has. Reagan raised her eyebrows like Kath was talking crazy, and Kath thought not for the first time, but for the first time since last night that Levi probably had sex with Reagan. And he likes to be outside, Cass said, just to change the subject. And he likes animals. We don't have anything in common. You're making him sound like he's some rowdy mountain man who, like, smokes cigars and has sex with prostitutes. Kath laughed, despite herself, like a dangerous French fur trapper. He's just a guy, Reagan said. Of course he's different from you. You're never going to find a guy who's exactly like you, first of all, because that guy never leaves his dorm room. Guys like Levi don't date girls like me. Again, the girl the the girl Again, the girl kind. Guys like Levi date girls like you. What does that mean? Reagan asked, tilting her head. Normal, Cass said. Pretty. Reagan rolled her eyes. No, Cass said. Seriously, look at you. You've got your shit together. You're not scared of anything. I'm scared of everything, and I'm crazy. Like, maybe you think I'm a little crazy, but I only ever let people see the tip of my crazy iceberg. Underneath this veneer of slightly crazy and socially inept, I'm a complete disaster. Reagan rolled her eyes again. Kath made a mental note to stop rolling her eyes at people. What would we, what would we do together? Kath asked. You'd want to go to the bar, and I'd want to stay home and write fan fiction. I'm not gonna talk you into this, Reagan said, especially if you're gonna be stupid. But I will say this: you're being stupid. He already likes you. He even likes your creepy fan fiction. He won't stop talking about it. Levi's just a guy, a really good, maybe even the best guy. And nobody's saying you have to marry him, but stop making everything so hard, Kath. You kissed him, right? The only question is, do you want to kiss him again? Kath clenched her fists until her fingernails bit into her palms. Reagan started stacking the empty dishes on her tray. Why did you break up? Kath blurted. I kept cheating on him, Reagan said flatly. I'm a pretty good friend, but I'm a shitty girlfriend. Kath picked up her tray and followed Reagan to the trash. She didn't see Levi that night. He worked Wednesday nights. That's when Kath realized she knew Levi's work schedule. But he texted her about a party Thursday at his house. Party? Thursday? My house. Kath didn't text him back. She tried to. She kept starting messages and deleting them. She almost sent back just a smiley face emoticon. Reagan got home from work late that night and went straight to bed. Kath was at her desk writing. Levi killed our outsiders quiz. Reagan said, Reagan said, stifling a yawn. Kath smiled down at her laptop. Did you talk about me? No, I didn't think you'd want me to. I told you, I'm a pretty good friend. Yeah, but you're more Levi's friend than mine. Bros before hoes, Reagan said. Before she left the room the next morning, Reagan asked Kath if she wanted to go to Levi's party. I don't think so, Kath said. I have class Friday morning at 8:30. Who registers for a class that meets Friday morning at 8:30? Kath shrugged. She didn't want to go to Levi's party, even though she did. Even though she liked him, she didn't like parties, and she didn't want the first time she saw him after what happened to be at a party with party people, with any people. Kath was pretty sure she was the only person in Pound Hall tonight. She tried to tell herself that it was kind of cool to have a 12-story building to herself, like being trapped in the library overnight. This is why I can't be with Levi, because I'm the kind of girl who fantasizes about being trapped in a library overnight, and Levi can't even read. Kath immediately felt bad for thinking that. Levi could read, sort of. She'd always thought that either people could read or they couldn't. Not this in between thing Levi had, where his brain would catch the words but couldn't hold on to them. Like reading was one of those rip-off claw games that they had at the bowling alley. But Levi clearly wasn't dumb. He remembered everything. He could quote extensively from the Simon Snow movies, and he knew everything there was to know about bison and piping plovers. And why was she even arguing this point with herself? It's not like she was going to send Abel's Levi. It's not like she was going to send Abel Levi's ACT scores. She would have texted him back, Levi, not Abel. But that would have been engaging in this situation, like moving a chess piece or kicking off from the ground on a teeter-totter. Better to leave Levi up to the Better to leave Levi up in the air for a day or two than end up stuck here by herself. The fact that she was thinking about whatever this was in terms of playground equipment showed that she wasn't ready for him. Levi was an adult. He had a truck and facial hair, and he'd slept with Reagan. She practically admitted it. Kath didn't want to look at a guy and picture the people he'd slept with, which had never been an issue with Abel. Nothing was ever an issue with Abel because she couldn't hear Ren screaming, you didn't like him." Kath liked Levi a lot. She liked looking at him. She liked listening to him, though sometimes she hated listening to him talk to other people. She hated the way he passed out smiles to everyone he met, like it didn't cost him anything, like he'd never run out. He made everything look so easy. Even standing, you didn't realize how much work everyone else put into holding themselves upright until you saw Levi leaning against a wall. He looked like he was leaning on something even when he wasn't. He made standing look like vertical lying down. Thinking about Levi's lazy hips and loose shoulders just dragged Cass's memory back to her bed. She spent the night with the boy, slept with him, and she never minded that that's all they'd done because it was a huge deal. She wished she could talk to Ren about this. Fuck Ren. No, damn her. Never mind her. All Ren did lately was complicate Kath's world. Kath had slept with a boy, with a guy, and it was awesome, warm, and tangly. What would have happened if they'd woken up any other way? Without Reagan barging in, would Levi have kissed her again, or would he still have rushed off with nothing more than a later? Later. Kath stared at her laptop. She'd been working on some paragraphs for 2 hours. It was a love scene, a pretty mild one, and she kept losing track of where Baz and Simon's hands were supposed to be. It was confusing sometimes with all the he's and the hims, and she'd been staring at this paragraph for so long she was starting to feel like she'd written every sentence before. Maybe she had. She shut the laptop and stood up. It was almost 10 o'clock. What time did parties end? What time did they start? Not that it mattered at this point. Kath didn't have any way to get to Levi's house. She walked over and stood in front of the full-length mirror that was mounted on their door. Kath looked exactly who Kath looked like exactly who she was. Eh. Kath looked exactly like who she was, an 18-year-old nerd who knew F all about boys or parties. Skinny jeans, unskinny hips, a faded pink t-shirt that said, "The magic word is please." A pink and brown argyle cardigan. Her hair was pulled up into a floppy half bun on top of her head. Kath pulled the rubber band out of her hair and took off her glasses. She had to step closer to the mirror to see herself clearly. She lifted her chin up and forced her forehead to relax. "I'm the cool one," she told herself. "Somebody give me some tequila because I'll totally drink it, and there's no way you're going to find me later having a panic attack in your parents' bathroom. Who wants to, who and there's no way you're going to find me later having a panic attack in your parents' bathroom. Who wants to French kiss?" This is why she couldn't be with Levi. She still called it French kissing, and he just went around putting his tongue in people's mouths. Kath still didn't look like the cool one. She didn't look like Ren. She pushed her shoulders back, let her chest stick out. There was nothing wrong with her breasts that she knew of. They were big enough that nobody ever called her flat-chested. She wished they were a little bigger. Then they'd balance out her hips. Then Kath wouldn't have to check pear-shaped on those how to dress for your body type guides. Those guides try to convince you that it's okay to be any shape, but when your body type is a synonym for foobar, it's hard to believe it. Kath pretended she was Ren. She pretended she didn't care. She pushed her shoulders back and lifted her chin and told her eyes to say, "Have you met me yet? I'm the pretty one, too." The door flew open and the doorknob caught Kath in the ribs. "Shit," she said, falling halfway onto her bed, halfway onto the floor. Her arms were over her head. She managed to protect her face. "Shit," Reagan said. She was standing over Kath. "Are you okay?" Kath brought her hand to her side and finished sliding onto the floor. "Jesus," she moaned. "Kath, shit." Kath sat up slowly. "Nothing seemed broken. Why were you standing right in front of the door?" Reagan demanded. "Maybe I was on my way out," Kath said. "Jesus, why do you have to kick the door open every single time you come in?" "My hands are always full." Reagan set down her backpack and her duffel bag and offered Kath a hand. Kath ignored it and pulled herself up using the bed. "If you know I always kick the door open," Reagan said, "you should know not to stand there." "I thought you were at the party." Kath had put her glasses back on. "Is this how you say you're sorry?" "Sorry," Reagan said, like it cost her all her tips. "I had to work. I'm going to the party now." "Oh." Reagan kicked on. Reagan kicked one of her shoes into her closet. "Are you coming with?" She didn't look at Kath. If she had, Kath might have said something other than what she did. "Sure." Reagan stopped mid-kick and looked up. "Oh, okay. Well, I'm just gonna change." "Okay," Kath said. "All right." Reagan grabbed her toothbrush and makeup bag and glanced back at Kath, smiling in approval. Kath looked at the ceiling. "Just change." As soon as Reagan left, Kath looked up, uh, wincing and feeling her side again, and opened her closet. Baz glared at her from the back side of her closet door. "Don't just stand there," she mumbled into the cutout. "Help me." When she and Ren divvied up their clothes, Ren had taken anything that said "party at a boy's place" or "leaving the house." Kath had taken everything that said "up all night," writing, or "it's okay to spill tea on this." She accidentally grabbed a pair of Ren's jeans at Thanksgiving, so she put those on. She found a white T-shirt and didn't have anything on it, anything silent anyway. There was just a weird stain that she'd have to hide with a sweater. She dug out her least piled up black cardigan. Kath had makeup somewhere in one of her drawers. She found mascara, an eyeliner pencil, and a crusty looking bottle of foundation, then went to stand in front of Reagan's makeup mirror. When Reagan came back, gently opening the door, her face looked fresh and her red hair was flat and smooth. Reagan looked kind of like Adele, Kath thought, if Adele had a harder, somewhat sharper twin sister, doppelganger. "Look at you," Reagan said. "You look slightly nicer than usual." Kath groaned, feeling too helpless to snark back. Reagan laughed. "You look fine. Your hair looks good. It's like Kristen Stewart's when she got extensions. Shake it out." Kath shook her head like she was empathetically disagreeing with something. Reagan sighed and took Kath's shoulders, piling, pulling her head down and shaking her hair out at the roots. Kath's glasses fell off. "If you're going to blow it out," Reagan said, "you may as well look like you've just been fucked." "Jesus," Kath said, pulling back her head. "Don't be gross." She bent over to pick up her glasses. "Do you need those?" Reagan asked. "Yes." Kath put them on. "I need them to keep me from becoming the girl, and she's all that." "It doesn't matter," Reagan said. "He already likes you. I think he's into the nerdy schoolgirl thing. He talks about you like you're something he found in a natural history museum." This confirmed everything Kath ever feared about Levi, wanting to buy a ticket to her freak show. "That's not a good thing," she said. "It is if It is if it's Levi," Reagan said. "He loves that stuff. When he gets really sad, he likes to walk around Morrill Hall." That was the museum on campus. There were wildlife dioramas and the world's largest mammoth fossil. "He does? God, that's cute." Reagan rolled her eyes. "Come on." It was almost 11 when they got to Levi's house, but not exactly dark because of all the snow. "Will anybody still be there?" Kath asked Reagan when they got out of the car. "Levi will still be here. He lives here." The house was exactly as Kath had imagined it. It was an old neighborhood with big white Victorian houses, except everybody had a huge porch and way too many mailboxes next to the door. Parking was ridiculous. They had to park 4 blocks away, and Kath was glad she wasn't wearing pointy, high-heeled boots like Reagan's. By the time they got to the door, Kath's stomach had realized what was happening. It twisted painfully, and she could feel her breath coming and going too soon. She couldn't believe she was doing this. Boy, party, strangers, beer, strangers, party, boy, eye contact. Reagan glanced over at her. "Don't be a spaz," she said sternly. Kath nodded, looking down at the worn, smooth welcome mat. "I'm not going to abandon you in there," Reagan said, "even if I want to." Kath nodded again, and Reagan opened the door. It was immediately warmer and brighter inside, and exactly not how Kath had imagined it. Kath had pictured bare walls and the sort of furniture that sat up on curbs for a week before anybody decided to take it in. But Levi's house was actually nice. Simple, but nice. There were a few paintings hanging on the wall and houseplants everywhere, ferns and spider plants, and a jade tree so big it looked like an actual tree. There was music playing, sleepy electronic music, but not too loud, and somebody was burning incense. There was plenty of people still there, all older than Kath, at least as old as Levi, and they were mostly just talking. Two guys standing next to the stereo with sort of dancing, sort of just being silly, and they didn't seem to care that they were the only ones. Kath stood as close as she could to Reagan's back and tried not to be obvious about looking for Levi. Inside her head, Kath was standing on tiptoe with her head over her eyes, scanning the horizons for ships. Everybody there knew Reagan. Somebody handed them each a beer. Kath took hers but didn't open it. It was Levi's roommate, one of them. Almost everybody Kath met in the next few minutes was one of Levi's roommates. She looked right through them. Maybe Levi was in the bathroom. Maybe he'd already gone to bed. Maybe Kath could climb into his bed like Goldilocks, and if he woke up, she'd just say, "Later," and run away. Goldilocks plus Cinderella. Reagan half Reagan half finished. Reagan had finished half a beer before she asked somebody, "Where's Levi?" The person, a guy with a beard and a black Ray-Ban frames, looked around the living room. Kitchen, maybe. Reagan nodded like she didn't care, because she really didn't. Kath thought, "Come on," she said to Kath, "let's go find him." And then, when they walked away from everyone else, be cool. The house had 3 big front rooms that were all connected: living room, dining room, and sunroom, and the kitchen was in the back through a narrow doorway. Kath stuck close behind Reagan, so Reagan saw Levi before Kath was even through the door. "Shit," Kath heard her whisper. Kath stepped into the kitchen. Kath was leaning back, and Kath was there. Kath stepped into the kitchen. Levi was leaning back against the sink. Levi, always leaning. He had a bottle of beer in one hand, and the same hand he was pressing into a girl's. He had a bottle of beer in one hand, the same hand he was pressing into a girl's back. The girl looked older than Kath, even with her eyes closed. Levi's other hand was tangled in her long blonde hair, and he was kissing her with his mouth smiling and open. He made it look so easy. Kath looked down immediately and walked out of the kitchen, walked straight through the house to the front door. She knew Reagan was right behind her because she could hear her muttering, "Shit, shit, shit." "But I don't understand," Simon stammered. "What is this insidious humdrum? Is he a man?" "Perhaps." The mage wiped the grit from his eyes and swept his wand out in front of them. "Ollie, ollie, Oxenfree," he whispered. Simon braced himself, but nothing happened. "Perhaps he's a man," the mage said, recovering his wry smile. "Perhaps he's something else, something less, I should think." "Is he a magician, like us?" "No," the mage said severely. Of that we can be certain. If he indeed is a he, is the enemy of magic. He destroys magic. Some think he eats it. He wipes the world clean of magic wherever he can." "You're too young to hear this, Simon. 11 is too young, but it isn't fair to keep keep it from you any longer. The insidious humdrum is the greatest threat the world of mages has ever faced. He's powerful, he's pervasive. Fighting him is like fighting off sleep when you're long past the edge of exhaustion. But fight him we must. You were recruited to Watford because we believe the humdrum has taken a special interest in you. We want to protect you. I vow to do so with my life. But you must learn, Simon, as soon as possible, how best to protect yourself. From Chapter 23, Simon Snow and the Mage's Heir. Copyright 2001 by Gemma T. Leslie. That is going to be a stopping point for now. And by the looks of it, we are, I would wager, about 48 or 49% the way through the book. The bookmark's a little bit bent. So, yep, it actually looks... Anyway, I won't bore you with the details. So, admittedly, I was really hoping to be a lot farther along than this by now, but yeah, this is where I'm at. So, yeah, thank you for joining me, and I will be continuing.